Without further delay, let's bring up our Toastmaster, three-time Toastmaster, Dr. Jerome Nugunde. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, three times to say charm, so we're going to get right on. It's kind of hard to introduce yourself, so I'm also the grammarian, and you could tell I'm jumpy, I'm invigorated, I'm excited, I'm everything. So what does everything mean? I'm not going to steal anybody's thunder, but we have some champions in the room, so I'll leave that for the vice president later on. That's why I'm invigorated. So let me bring up our VP. Yes, invigorate. All right, at this time I'll bring up our Toastmaster, the Toastmaster Minute, no other than Dr. Leonard Mukasa. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Fellow Toastmaster.
Toastmaster Minute, last minute. Have you attended Grand Rounds? Did you attend Grand Rounds last week? Some of you did. I'm thinking about adverse childhood events, trauma. We're going to hear about trauma today. I would submit to you there's this other invisible trauma. What you see of a person is 1/8. The other 7/8 are embedded somewhere. And I would encourage you, fellow Toastmasters, to get out that other hidden iceberg, because it makes the whole difference in our lives, our society, our nation. Talking about compromise and forgiveness and tackling the big issue of childhood events in our lives. Because 72% of kids in Arkansas have one of these indicators. That's a high number. And to get along, fellow Toastmasters, think of adverse childhood events, think of collective trauma, think of collective resilience. Invigorate the victims of adverse childhood events. Fellow Toastmaster Jerome. That's my minute.
Thank you for that exciting, invigorative Toastmaster Minute. We will proceed. We have three great speeches this morning, and I will bring up, working from one of the three scheduled speakers, workbook, Ms. Monique Monano. Thank you, fellow Toastmaster.
Thank you. Good afternoon, fellow Toastmasters and guests. I have finally decided to break the ice. My name is Monique Monano, and let me tell you, my last name is easier to pronounce if you say my first and last name together, Monique Monano. It kind of flows together. My last name, the origin of it is Nigerian. My father was from Nigeria. My mom is from here. However, if you mispronounce my last name, I won't be offended. People mispronounce it all the time, and typically I just smile and go along with it. It's okay with me. Sometimes I'll correct you. Most times I won't. But speaking of names, I'm used to being called different names. People call me Monica, Monica, they call me Michelle. You may wonder, like, how do they get those names out of Monique? Well, I have a cousin named Monica. I have my sister's name, Michelle. And usually when they're talking to me, they're calling me Michelle. When they're talking to my sister, they're calling her Monique. So I have one sister. I have two brothers. So it's Monique, Michelle, Timothy, and Terry. So it's Monique, M and M, and T and T. And something unique about my family is most of my cousins' names start with the same initials. And I continued the tradition. I have 4 children, and they're Darian, Dominique, Deshaun, and Deanna. 4D. I don't know what it is about names. That's something my grandmother started, and so everybody does. I have an aunt that her kids start with K's, J's, T's, and it goes on forever. Has anyone ever heard of the community of McAlmont? Okay, most people haven't, but it's a small community in East North Little Rock, and that's where I was raised by my mother and my grandparents. When my mother was a young mother, and when she moved away from home, she wanted me to be able to go to school with my cousins, and so I stayed with my grandparents, because I have a lot of family in the community of McAlmont. But if you're from McAlmont, you don't actually pronounce it that way. I guess it's the countryside of us, we just say McAlma. I began school at Harris Elementary. My family wanted the best for me, so in the late 80s, when the magnet schools came on the scene, my parents wanted me to go there, and so they were one of the families that you may have seen on the news that would camp out in order to get a spot. At that time, that's what you had to do, and later it turned to the lottery system. It worked out for them. I got a spot, and I transferred to Carver Magnet. And from Carver Magnet, I went to Horace Mann Magnet. And from Horace Mann, I went to Parkview and graduated in '96. Go Patriots. I was taught throughout my years that faith, family, and education was a big deal. My grandparents instilled in me that my faith would keep me, my family would support me, and my education would be the vehicle that would drive me where I wanted to go. And I have since also taught my children the same thing. Out of my 4 children, I have a 20-year-old, an 18-year-old, a 16-year-old, and a 9-year-old. One is in college in Texas, one is on their way to college, and the other 2 are still in school. One in high school, one in elementary. I'm still trying to figure out where the elementary one came from. She kind of snuck in on me. I started at the health department in 2003 in tobacco prevention. If you were here then, tobacco prevention used to be on the 5th floor, and then we moved to the basement. I'm currently a budget manager in the WIC program, but throughout the years, I've worked at DHS, I've worked at DFA, and now I'm back where I consider home, Department of Health. Throughout my different adventures, my family has always been very supportive, and I'm grateful for that. My friends have been supportive. I have my best friend, she also works here. We've been friends since 4th grade. She was the first friend I made when I went to Carver, and she works here in this building in epidemiology. Her name is Priska. We've been friends for like 30 years. Not to say how old I am, I think I'm still pretty young, but. So throughout in my education ventures, I went to UCA, and then I transferred to UALR, where I obtained a degree in the year 2009. And although it took me a little longer than the typical 5 years, I was reminded by the faith that my grandmother instilled in me that the race does not go to the swift, but it goes to the one who endures to the end. And I'm grateful that because of the support of my family, I was able to endure and obtain a degree, and I have recently enrolled in school again to obtain another one. And I'm teaching my children the same values, to value family, to keep the faith, and to use education as a vehicle to where you want to go. And so I'm just grateful for the support that I've had over the years from coworkers, family, from friends, and even support that I receive here in the Toastmasters. And I'm glad to be a part of this program. Thank you.
Yes, if nothing else fires you up, family tradition will shake you up and keep you faith, family. Our next speaker is going to work out of the communication manual, Her topic is Arkansas Trauma Registry. No other than Miss Brittany Lee. Toastmaster Lee, thank you.
Oh, this isn't working. This screen isn't working. It's okay.
Greetings, Toastmasters. Today I'm going to be presenting on the Arkansas Trauma Registry, talking about how to use data to drive process improvement. This is a presentation I will be doing at an upcoming conference, so I appreciate any feedback you all may have. If you can shoot me an email with feedback after, that would be great. So my name is Brittany Lee. I'm a trauma registry specialist. I also work with Jonna Jacobs and Austin Porter in the Trauma Registry. My objectives for this presentation is to talk about the role of the registry, the process for data collection and quality assurance, and to also talk about how to describe performance improvement and outcomes monitoring. So when you think about trauma, you think of one or two things. You may think about mental trauma, as Dr. Mukasa mentioned, where you're talking about more psychological things. But in the trauma registry, we focus more so on physical trauma. All of us have been driving and seen something similar to this, where you see the fire department and EMS, and there's an accident, or you've experienced other type of traumas, maybe a fall or an injury of a loved one or something to that degree. So I have this here to talk about the trauma system in Arkansas historically. Let's say 10 years ago, you passed this scene. What would typically happen is someone on the road will see the accident, call the police. Hey, there's been an accident. They'll send out the ambulance. They'll come out the fire truck and assess the situation, get the patient, and take them to the nearest hospital. Once that patient got to the hospital, at that point, they would determine what's going on, try to stabilize the patient, figure out if they're, based on what the patient's needs are, figure out if they can take care of that patient needs or if they need to be transferred. If that patient needs to be transferred, depending on where they needed to go or what the issue was, it could take hours to find out where that patient needs to go, because the staff would need to call each hospital to say, hey, here's what we have, can you take this person? Today, that process is a lot different due to our trauma system. Now what happens is EMS gets on the scene, they can contact the Arkansas Trauma Communication Center, also referred to as ATCC, to find out where this patient should go. And as you can imagine, a situation like this can be a matter of life and death, and time is of the essence. So our trauma system has made great strides in improving the health outcomes and quality of life of Arkansans by being able to reduce this time frame and that patients are able to get care. So I want to talk about the role of the registry within the trauma system. I'm going to give you an overview of the system and drill down into where the registry fits in. So the Trauma System Act was established by the Act 559 in 1993. At this point, it was documented that there was a need for a trauma system within the state. When you think about Arkansas, we have some rural areas. The impact financially, in terms of the cost, in terms of quality of life after experiencing a traumatic injury, the cost of mortality was becoming a burden on families and the state as a whole. So the need was identified that we need to have a more coordinated trauma system. This act was not, or Act 393 of 2009 is the act that actually funded the trauma system. So here's kind of a visual representation of the trauma system. All of these circles surrounding the main circle contribute to what makes the trauma system. Here at the Arkansas Department of Health, we have the trauma section, we have the trauma registry, we have an EMS section, which also houses the EMS registry. The EMS stands for Emergency Medical Services. You also have the EMS agency, so the ambulance and things of that nature. We have the call center, ATCC, as I mentioned, and we also have the hospitals. I'm going to break each of these down to kind of give you a more detailed picture of how all of these entities make up the trauma system. In addition to those entities, we also have advisory councils. We have the Trauma Advisory Council, that's the main one, and then there are trauma regional advisory councils that are broken up into 7 different areas across the state. So you have the Metro region, North, South, and Arkansas Valley. The ADH trauma section is mission to carry out regulations that manage the trauma system. They issue grants to hospitals and EMS agencies. They also support the Arkansas Trauma Communication Center. They provide trainings to trauma personnel, and they work closely with the Trauma Advisory Council to keep the system intact in terms of the direction that the trauma section wants to go. We have emergency medical services. So we have the agencies which provide pre-hospital care. And those agencies can be private, such as MIMS, or they can be based out of the hospital. So Baptist has their own EMS, and also Arkansas Children's Hospital, and there are others throughout the state. As I mentioned previously, the Arkansas Department of Health also has an EMS department that also houses the EMS registry. So the department within ADH, they are mission to regulate EMS, to do licensing, inspections, and things of that nature. We have the call center. So as I mentioned, on the scene or even in the hospital, trauma personnel have access to this call center where they can call in to say, hey, I have this patient, and they're able to coordinate transfers quickly by using this call center. They're also able to use this to do consultations through telemedicine, where they can kind of have a virtual exam room. And there's been a project using hand injuries, or there's been a project that focuses on hand injuries to better provide quality care to those patients who've experienced hand injuries to make sure they get to where they need to go in a timely manner. We have the designated hospitals. So there are different levels of hospitals. There's levels 1, 2, 3, and 4. And based on level, those facilities are able to provide a certain type of care. For the sake of time, we're going to skip through. The registry focuses on the data portion of the trauma system. So once a patient is received into the hospital, the registrar enters the information into the registry. And our mission is to collect and maintain all the data. So that's basically what the trauma registry does. We're going to skip through this slide for the sake of time. And I want to talk quickly about the process for data collection. The trauma registry has been in place for 7 years. There are 58 designated hospitals and over 130,000 records in our registry. There's a certain inclusion criteria that we use for our data. We don't collect information on all traumas, only specific traumas. So those traumas that will result in you being admitted to the hospital or resulting in death as a result of significant injuries to the body, burns, complications of trauma, and the other things listed on the slide. Our information is submitted to the National Trauma Data Bank. Participation is voluntary, and we choose to participate. The National Trauma Data Bank contains over 5 million records. In terms of quality assurance, there are several measures that we use to make sure that we have quality data. There are data validation tools built into our software. Our hospitals submit information to us quarterly, and we also use QSource, which is a third-party vendor, to do quality control. There are some strengths and limitations to the trauma registry. The biggest limitation is that it cannot be used as a surveillance tool. As I mentioned, we do not collect information on all traumas, only certain traumas. But one of the biggest strengths is that it can be used to measure performance. There are several mechanisms in place used to measure performance. We provide hospitals with scorecards and annual PI reports. There are also tools built within the software, Report Runner and Driller, where facilities can use to look at their data and analyze it. And there are also PI activities built into the advisory councils. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
That was a very invigorating, spirited presentation. Our next speaker is going to follow up in the same light. I love appetizers. When I go to a restaurant, me and my party, sometimes we just feast on the appetizer. So our next speaker is going to give us an appetizer of his speech tomorrow at the Arkansas Hospital Association. His topic is stroke and heart attack care in Arkansas. Please welcome our own David Rundy. Yeah, David. So I'm ready for my appetizer.
Get that presentation. This is what you do when you're
It's
not
part
totally
of the
prepared.
appetizer. We just get energized and we salivate, when you're waiting for the waitress to bring you a wait, so you're doing good.
Quiet, please. Wait a sec. I'll take one. Oh, yeah. All right. All good. Take care. Way to go. Nice. Bring it on. Gotcha. I'm here for you. Oh, no. Please, please, please. I'm waiting. Interesting. Not buying it. Not fair. That's it. This conversation is over. Oh, brother.
Body language can tell you all sorts of things.
I'm having a stroke. I'm having a stroke.
Know the sudden signs. Learn fast. F. Face drooping. A. Arm weakness. S. Speech difficulty. T. Time. Time to call 911 immediately. The sooner they get to the hospital, the sooner they'll get treatment, and that can make a remarkable difference in their recovery. Learn the body language, the sudden signs, and spot a stroke fast.
Let me ask you a question. Why should we care so much about stroke? Absolutely, Joyce. We should care because of this map, because of the color purple. The more purple, the more stroke death. Can't you see a lot of purple in our neck of the woods? A lot of purple in the southeastern stroke belt. Raise your hand if you know someone who's had a stroke. Everybody in this room. Do you know where we rank among all the 50 states in stroke death? We used to be 1 or 2. We've actually gotten a little bit better. We're now number 5. But in the top 5, progress, but we still have a lot of work to do. Let me ask you this question. Do you know what the single biggest hit of our state's Medicaid budget is? Nursing homes, nursing home care. Of course, what is the reason so many people have to have nursing home care? Because of stroke. Stroke takes a tremendous toll on our state in blood and treasure. Now look at heart disease. Do you see a kind of a pattern? The same states particularly hit hard with heart attack death, actually heart disease death rate. Raise your hand if you know someone who's had a heart attack. Looks like everybody in the room. It affects me very personally, just like stroke. My grandmothers both died of stroke. My grandfather, who was a physician, I never met him. I was named after him. He died of a heart attack. Do you know where we rank among all the 50 states in heart attack? In heart attack death rate, we're number one. And we're number one by far. I think we're like 74.5 deaths per 100,000, which is well above number two. Do you know the estimated total cost of heart attack per one heart attack, all the direct costs, all the indirect costs, the total of a severe heart attack? What's your guess, your best guess? $300,000. It's actually about $1 million. And think about that, multiply that by the thousands of heart attacks we see. Imagine how much we're talking about. A huge toll in the state, a huge cost in blood and treasure. Don't we want to do everything we possibly can? Don't we want to do everything we can to reduce the impact of heart attack and stroke? There's an old saying that says, if you don't make waves, the tide will never change. And I want to make some waves. In the next few minutes, we'll talk about our program goals. We'll talk about what we're trying to do at the health department from a systems perspective, show you some data we think you'll find of interest, talk about the importance of people knowing the signs and acting in time. We'll talk about some opportunities for public education, and we'll answer your questions before we wrap up. Our goal is pretty simple. We want to reduce the impact of stroke and heart attack on our state. We want to reduce death. We want to reduce disability. We heard Toastmaster Lee talk about the trauma program, a very successful program. We want to build on the success of that program. It's been very successful in bringing together a system, the community, EMS, and hospitals working together in a coordinated way to reduce the impact of trauma in our state, improving patient care, improving outcomes. We want to leverage that for stroke and heart attack. And we need to increase, as you'll see in some of this data, the number of people who call 911. People are not calling 911. They're driving themselves in about half the cases. But we'll come back to that, because all the data shows that when someone calls 911, they have a much better chance of having better care and a better outcome. Have you ever heard of the Brain Attack Coalition? No one has heard of them, but they're a pretty powerful group. There are 16 professional groups that make up the coalition, including the CDC, the American Heart Association, the National Stroke Association. They wrote a paper a few years ago, and they said we have a big problem in our country with stroke. And that is that over half the country, half the population lives outside of an hour of a primary stroke center. We know that with stroke, time is of the essence. We know with stroke, time is brain. You have a very short window to get treated with stroke. The Brain Attack Coalition said that we need to do something to have a better system of care in our country. We need to have a new designation for hospitals. Beyond the Joint Commission Primary Stroke Center designation, we need to have hospitals that serve the rural communities. There's a lot of people that live in rural areas. And around the country, maybe not a huge amount in each area, but if you combine it around the United States, that's a lot of people. The Brain Attack Coalition said we need to have a new level of designation of a hospital that can provide basic acute stroke patient care, basic diagnosis, basic treatment for stroke. And they called it the Acute Stroke Ready Hospitals. In Arkansas, we started designating hospitals about a year ago. There's a photo with the governor we had in September of 2016. And we need to wrap up here. I have a lot more, but this is a presentation I'm going to be sharing tomorrow with about 30 CEOs of acute care hospitals, critical access hospitals. But I'll just wrap up by saying, as we go through here, Let me just wrap up by saying this. We have our work cut out for us. You've seen some of this data. And let me ask the question again. Don't we want to do everything we possibly can?
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Mikasa. I certainly do. And I believe that if we can come together, if we can work with the trauma program, build on their success, if we can work on designating hospitals as stroke-ready, if we can work with EMS to make sure they bring the patient to the most appropriate facility, and if we can do public outreach and get people to recognize, know the signs, and act in time, we are going to make some waves. Thank you. Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you. That was very invigorating. We will make some waves. Everybody here subscribes to wave making. I will bring up our Toastmaster for our table topics, Miss Camille. Come. Thank you, Toastmaster.
Good afternoon, fellow Toastmasters and guests. Hi. I decided that I wanted to go back in time a little bit with my topics today. So the first question I'm asking is, if you could turn back the hands of time, what advice would you give to your 10-year-old self? Toastmaster Leonard.
Back in time. Let me tell you what happened to me at the age of 10. I lost my dad. Looking back, what could I give myself? That's a big adverse childhood event. Come to learn decades later. Yes. Have I survived? I have. Have I thrived? Not maybe to the extent I would. If I had a chance to go back in time, I think I would think of meeting fellow kids who had lost their parents. See how they were doing. I would have liked more public service, public engagements, bereavement, have people come out of it. I think it would have helped. A lot of it I internalized for a long time. I went to public school after that. Most kids had their parents. I was at a loss for a while. Yes, I have survived, but I would have thrived. No regrets, life goes on. Toastmaster Camille.
Thank you, Dr. Mikasa. Okay, the next question deals with this day in history. On this day in history, back in 1976, the #1 song was Disco Duck. What do you remember about that song, Disco Duck, or what do you remember about disco in general? Toastmaster, I can't remember your name. Shauna, yeah.
One of the things I remember about that song, Disco Duck, was I was about 5 or 6 when I heard it, and it used to make me laugh so hard. I would hear it on the radio, and the song was, like, the person singing the song was in the voice of Donald Duck, and it just was so funny to me. So I remember that. I also remember disco music. That was something my parents liked a lot for some reason. I never quite understood why, because I didn't care for disco music, but they thought it was great music, and they enjoyed it, and they played a lot of it, and that's what I recall.
Our next question will be, what's your best excuse when you were a kid? If your teacher asked you, why didn't you do your homework? Why didn't you turn in your homework today? So I'd like to talk to Distinguished Toastmaster Biddle, please. Ms. Joyce.
You actually asked the wrong person that question, because I'm not the person that didn't turn in their homework. I was a nerd. My homework was always done. If my homework wasn't done, I was sick. Because, you know, I was one of those people that always got A's. And on the off chance, I might get a B. Now, I will admit, when I was in the 10th grade, I didn't particularly like biology. So, dang. It was the weirdest thing with biology, though. Because since I didn't particularly care for biology, because you know we got grades every 9 weeks. There were 2 9 weeks where I got a C. So the semester came out as a B. Because I get an A 1 9 weeks, the next 9 weeks get a C. Because I didn't like biology. And those 9 weeks that I didn't particularly care for what we was doing, I got a C. Because, you know, when we dissected stuff, I didn't do it. I dissected the tapeworm, but I didn't dissect that frog because I didn't care for it. I wasn't doing that and didn't choose to. Now I'm toasting.
I don't know, do we have time for one more? We're behind on time. But okay. I have one more kind of off-the-wall question. Home is where the heart is. So discuss the pros of living near a landfill. Oh, sorry. Toastmaster Jerome. Thank you.
There's a place in Arkansas called Sweet Home. Wow. Home. Landfill. The two don't get together, but if my home was on a landfill, I hope it would be a gold mine where they've piled bits of electronics, bits of things that you could melt down, you know, because you got to be creative. My heart is in my home. And following up from what Toastmaster talked about the heart, I think it'll make me sick because I know a bit about brownfields. In my other life, I served on a couple of federal commissions, and I'd had industrial hygiene training from University of North Carolina, so would go out to these landfills. And sometimes when we came out, in spite of our protective gear, you will itch a little bit here and a little bit there. And if I had to live there for all my life, I think I'll grow a 3rd finger or a 6th head or some. So yes, home is where the heart is, but I think we'll have lots of heart attacks, maybe a stroke, maybe we'll be super number 1, right? But home is sweet home, and I know in Arkansas, we don't need to live on a landfill. That's why we have the Superfund. Superfund is the EPA, tries for us to clean this out. So when we start having childhood or adolescent cancers, that's not a good place. So let's not associate our homes with landfills. Let us create waves against landfills.
That's all that I have for the topics.
Thank you again, Toastmaster. Let me bring our distinguished Toastmaster, our General Evaluator, Toastmaster Philip Borden.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's good to be here. Thanks for coming to Toastmasters. A busy Monday. I'm sure there are many other things you could be doing with your time. It is the role of the General Evaluator to introduce and to usher in the evaluation portion of a Toastmasters meeting. You'll go to a lot of meetings. You'll never get to an evaluation portion of the meeting where people can find out how they did. It is also typically the role of the General Evaluator to bring a little bit more level of energy to the room. This is about the time of the meeting when our energy starts to wane. We see more empty seats than filled seats. It's not just any one person's job to bring the energy to the room. Therefore, I'm going to share that task with our next presenter. It's distinguished Toastmaster Joyce Biddle, here to evaluate Monique Monanu's icebreaker speech. Welcome, Joyce.
Hello, everybody. Monique, what an interesting speech. When I asked her what her title was, she says, I didn't have one. Then she goes, let me see. My journey. And I thought, oh, well, that's just great. First of all, I thought you were a great speaker. Even though this is your first speech, you did an excellent job. You didn't stumble over your words. You have great vocal variety to be just your first speech and everything. You also did a good job of presenting yourself. And I like the way you talked about your name and how people mispronounce your name. Because I was like, people do that with my last name. They do that with the name I currently have, which is my maiden name. And people did that with my married name, which I got rid of. And some people that know me longer know I had a different name. And I've been divorced, so I went back to my maiden name. But anyway. But I understand that. Because people, for some reason, will put an S on Biddle. And they will also misspell Biddle. But that don't have anything to do with your speech. Let me go back. You have a very clear voice. And even though you had notes up here, it wasn't apparent that you were using notes. And I like that. And I didn't see anything that you really need to change. And you did an awesome job of telling your story. I like that, and I'm looking forward to seeing future speeches. Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you. I just sat down and realized I missed an opportunity. It is often the General Evaluator's job to invigorate the club and the membership. That is my goal today. Next, we'll hear from Toastmaster Leonard Mikasa evaluating Brittany Lee's speech.
Yes, distinguished Toastmaster Philip. The Arkansas Trauma Registry. Thank you, Brittany, for this informative presentation. What I liked a lot about your presentation are the visuals. The PowerPoint slides summarized your message, quite important message. Went through the history of the trauma registry, built your body. The purpose is clear. You are going to be presenting this work elsewhere. So my evaluation comes in. What I've liked to improve on this speech is come to us with a question. We've always experienced trauma. How about you? How about Rupa? I was It's personally involved in this because I was in a car wreck in 2005. I hardly survived. I have bruises to show for it. It's personal to me, trauma. The presentation you are going to give, I think, would not give you 7 minutes. I'm imagining you have about 30 minutes, so you'll be able to put in all your points. Where if you were to focus on the trauma registry, you'd need to build that in quickly because you are torn between balancing the Arkansas trauma system and the trauma registry, and it didn't have enough time to cover the important ground. So the conclusion, again, you are rushed because of time, but I think for your presentation coming up, just be ready. It's quite powerful information, and everybody has been touched by trauma. Thank you for invigorating me after surviving a car wreck. Distinguished Toastmaster Phil Broderick.
Thank you. We do not have an assigned evaluator for Dave Rudney's speech. However, as he mentioned, it is a part of a presentation that he will be giving tomorrow. Therefore, we want to open the floor for anyone, round-robin style, to give Dave any feedback that you may have noticed to help him tomorrow, anything that he might improve on, anything specific that you thought that he did well. Who would like to give some feedback to Dave on his speech?
Oh, okay. Well, I like the way you started out with the video and then went into the question about how many are you have doing it. Because that gives, it wakes up the crowd and gives them an opportunity to think before you actually go and put the statistics. And then when you ask them the statistics, it surprises them because people don't know that it's actually gone down. Which I already knew that, but that was a fact.
A bright spot,
Yeah.
small bright spot.
Well, no, but yeah, but the presentation itself is very good. It's good.
Yes.
This is Dave at his best. I don't have comments except have some good sleep, not my coffee, no long visits, and all will be well. It's going to be an impactful presentation.
I
No
was
doubt about it.
up a little late last night because of the social visit.
Didn't affect you the passport tomorrow.
Right. Thank you. Any other feedback in terms of how you think we might do better? I know you all saw just a sliver of the presentation, but I've got another video in there. I've got other questions of the audience. I just think what I've learned in Toastmasters is you want to make these speeches when you give them as much as you can kind of a dialogue and not just a monologue, because it's not really connecting that well with people if you just talk for 30 minutes. People will tone out at about 5 minutes. So if you occasionally throw a question and make them maybe do an activity or do something involving. Otherwise, people are going to be thinking about their dinner plans and stuff like that. So that's what I've learned. Donna. Yes, it's for the Critical Access Hospital CEO Conference.
So just keep in mind that that's your audience, and you have a lot of students, so, respect that, respect their knowledge, and sometimes give them too much, and thorough information. Does that make sense?
What would be an example specifically?
Frankly, you know someone who's had a stroke, well, they don't have to say what's their name, and it's
family member or friend.
Directly deal with patients. It's true, but they see their numbers every day, and their costs, they're very concerned with the costs of everything. But yes, if you could personalize it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Excellent. Thank you. I would do that. Yes.
Yeah, I worked in hospitals for a very long time, and those two subject areas are some of the things I've dealt with. For admission, if we could find a story from a patient's view, why they would bring the next family member to that institution, it's one of the things that CEOs, because of their high level, want to know that sense that, okay, we did so well, the next patient will still come in, because they know a whole lot. But those, we used to do surveys on that. Why would your relative come back here?
Right, and actually, I want to make that point because this designation program is a way to get people to start to come and get treated locally, because a lot of times patients go to the big cities, and that means they have to travel out further. But one of the benefits, to Jonna's point, for the hospitals is that if they become designated by the health department as small rural hospitals, we'll help promote this and we'll help them bring in more patients. That's just one of, there's a number of things I want to talk about. I didn't really get into it because I kind of got into just the beginning of it. I was thinking about that. Why are they interested in this presentation? That is one thing. Thank you.
Okay. I would just add, the only thing that I noticed in addition to that, there's no right or wrong answer to this because it depends on the audience, and audiences vary in size and in what type of interaction they might expect, is because you know the quote as well that I do about the importance of questions. Why give a statement when you can ask a question? Questions are very powerful, and it is a way to interact and keep the audience plugged in so they're not just listening to one-way communication. But depending on the audience, maybe the best type of questions to ask are the low-level questions. The cookies are on the bottom shelf, short answer questions. Depending on the audience, sometimes the audience members don't want to take time away from the presenter. You're the presenter, you're bringing the content. I don't want to take your time to answer a short paragraph question. I'll throw out a 2 or 3 word answer. The other type of question, I don't know if you have more of this built into your presentation, the open-ended number questions. I'm always afraid to venture a guess on those. 300,000, 26,000, 500,000, I really have no idea. I'm looking forward to your answer. You're bringing the content, then we hear the answer is 1 million. 2 things there. One, you don't want to make a audience member regret volunteering an answer, and the other is you don't want to have anyone leave with confusion over which was the right answer. I heard some good answers thrown out, and I'm not sure I remember exactly what the right answer was. Just a couple of thoughts on that. Well, for the sake of time, we will move on to our grammarian's report from Toastmaster Jerome Ngundu.
Because we're running short on time, we have Dr. Mukasa, who won the day, and the runner-up was our own distinguished Toastmaster, Philip. So the count was 5 versus 2. Our counter, Miss Meadows. Yes, Shauna. Yes, Toastmaster Shauna.
We had several ahs, so's, a lot of so's today. Seems like we're using the so's when we're uncomfortable with the silence, so maybe try to work on not filling that space with the so. Thank you.
Thank you. And the timer's report from Jonna Jacobs.
I'll start with our Toastmaster minute. Leonard Mukasa was a minute 32. Speaker 1, Monique, 5:57. Speaker 2, Brittany Lee, 9:32. Speaker 3, David Vrundy, 8:04. The table topics leader spoke for 49 seconds total. Leonard spoke for 1:33. Shauna for 46 seconds. Joyce for 1:41. Jerome for 1:55. The general evaluator spoke for 1:14. Evaluator 1, 1:56. Evaluator 2, 2:16. Evaluator 3, which was a group effort, so that was 7 minutes, 6 seconds. The grammarian spoke for 15 seconds. The accountant spoke for 16 seconds. And I have been speaking for 53 seconds. Big hand to everyone on times.
Thank you. For my closing general evaluator comment, just want to say I'm encouraged to discover that 2 of our 3 speeches today are public health presentations that these speakers will use in the future in their careers. That's one of the reasons that we founded this club here at the health department, is to help us practice speeches in the public health arena. I'm encouraged to see that. If there's anything missing, it's not just the number of empty seats that we have today, but again, the level of energy. The more we can pretend like we're a full room of bustling, energetic audience members, the better practice that is for when that's the kind of environment that you'll speak in front of. In fact, if I had to put it in one sentence, I would say it this way: let's speak to a small group of our friends as though we're speaking to a large professional audience, so that when we speak in front of a large professional audience, it will be as though we're speaking to a small group of our friends, right? With that, I'll bring Jonna Jacobs back up as our meeting presider.
The only announcement I have today is that next week will be a regular meeting. The 30th will be a new member orientation. We will still meet in here, but there won't be any scheduled speakers other than those officers that will be speaking to our new members. So please, if you know a new member that's not here today, please encourage them to attend on Monday the 30th. Thank you very much for a wonderful meeting today.